As I mentioned a moment ago, Southport observing a 3-minute silence today to mark the first anniversary of the murders of 3 young girls at that local dance class. The attack also left 8 others injured, 2 adults injured, and a legacy of absolute horror that clearly that community and those around, family, friends, will struggle with for many, many years, if not forever. The community focusing on trying to rebuild with plans for legacy gardens and a new playground, which will be in the memory of the victims. Let's speak to the writer and commentator Charlie Bentley-Astor on this point. Afternoon to you, Charlie. I think I'd speak for everybody when I say this is one of the most, you know, when this story broke a year ago, we were on it. I mean, it was just, I don't even know how to describe the horror, frankly. Everything about the setting, how it happened, the age of the victims, the curious, whatever the motivation was of the perpetrator. Just one of the most horrific triple murders, and of children, we have ever seen.
As you say, there are no words to describe what happened. It's kind of not the job of the public to do so. It's for the families to articulate what matters to them, particularly in the aftermath. And all of them have established charities in the name of their children, and each have found their own way to either live with or overcome their difficulties. What it is, though, is the duty of the nation to find out what went wrong and how we stop an attack like this ever happening again against our children.
Whenever there is an attack, and this one is, look, I don't want to get too much and start naming the perpetrator of this horrendous act, but of course the question that comes up that's always raised, which I find infuriating in many respects, you know, lessons will be learned. And I don't know whether it's ever possible to learn lessons if there is a mad person on the loose of whatever background or ideology or wherever they come from. I don't know whether the human gene pool is ever capable of mustering the wisdom or the knowledge to ever fully eradicate that. Do we just live with the idea that terrible people will always live among us, or is there a kind of a route that we can at least attempt to stop this?
I mean, you're right, Ian, in that psychopathy does exist and persist within the population at 1% and sociopathy at 5%, but it doesn't mean that we're powerless to do anything. At least within the case of the perpetrator of the Southport massacre, he came across every kind of support service that existed for teenagers, young people and adults to apprehend, control, contain him. And as we're discovering at every single juncture, it wasn't that he was simply overlooked, as the government are trying to lay out. It seems that he was intentionally dismissed again and again and again in a way that cannot be understood or forgiven.
And again, you know, we can talk about the PREVENT programme. You know, he slid off the radar. There was all sorts of flags that were kind of raised, and concerns through schooling. We know this person had an absolute fascination with, you know, horrific violent acts, with a particular focus on school shootings and things like that. He dabbled into the sort of almost the Al-Qaeda territory with stuff that he downloaded on his computer. We spoke to somebody fairly recently on this kind of area of where people sit on the spectrum. Some have a very specific religious reason behind the horrors that they carry out. You know, for others, it is a level of anger because of something that happened to them personally. It could be something as relatively minor as, you know, they've been dumped by a partner and out they went. And then there's another group where it's just about sheer violence. And perhaps you mentioned psychopathy there, which is true. You know, maybe we never solve that, and these like oddballs of whatever age and in whatever form will just be there forever, and our job is to just try and find ourselves to be as secure as we can forever.
Well, I don't think so. I think certainly being able to completely isolate ourselves from these people isn't ideal.
Yeah.
But there are more things that we can do, and that's why the Southport independent inquiry has been launched into this, because there are so many obvious failings. The government, after the trial of the perpetrator, looked at revising the definition of terrorism to accommodate this, what appears to be a new style of attack, people who aren't motivated explicitly by one individual ideology or one individual instance that galvanizes their ferocity. It's people who are seeded with ideas again and again and again until it becomes a fixation, an obsession that they need to satiate. And so, at least in the case of the Southport killer, the police are still, at least what is known and in the public domain, are still unsure about precisely what motivated him and why he went to that specific dance class. To some extent, it seems like a random act, in that he was scrolling through Instagram and likely came across an advert for this dance class. And to some extent, this is all the more horrifying, both for the victims, their families, but also the wider public, that this could be anybody at anything at any time. And there's nowhere that you can take your children and guarantee that they'll be safe. The poor dance teachers have castigated themselves again and again and again and again for leaving the door of the dance studio open, despite it being the middle of summer, blazing hot. And now we're in the position where we have to decide whether we can have the breeze on our children's faces or risk them being murdered. And yet, in this being random, there is some peace in that these children were not targeted specifically for them, their personalities, their individuality, who they are. They were just bloody unfortunate to be in that situation, and the parents could not have known, the dance teachers could not have known. And so it's a double-edged sword about how we tackle this, but certainly not ignoring the red flags that are there time and time again would be a starting point.
You'd think so. I was reading something this morning where I think, I don't know whether it was Prevent or some other organisation or establishment, that there was even somebody they stumbled across who was hoping to replicate what had happened in Southport. So this kind of criminal mind, and you are forced to wonder, you know, what did criminal minds or angry, violent minds do before social media and the like, or the ability to be able to see or replicate or copycat? You know, is that, am I simplifying it by even raising that, or is there a correlation between the kind of world we now live in and the sort of attacks people will carry out? Maybe previously somebody might have stood on the top of a building with a gun to their head and jumped off it, I don't know, in order to, you know, illuminate to the world how angry they were with everything. Now we see these kind of attacks, which are sort of designed almost to create maximum impact. You know, a kids' dance school, that backdrop of little innocent under 10s attending, for goodness sake, you know, a Taylor Swift themed dance. I mean, it doesn't get any more troubling and heartbreaking when you think of just the sheer backdrop of innocence that was at play here, and then this came along. Is it the world we now live in, I wonder, Charlie? I know we're sort of veering into other territory here, but it's nonetheless interesting, that is promoting these kind of attacks. Do people fuel their anger by what they see online?
Well, at least in this instance, some of the parents of victims have come forward and sort of agreed with the government that there needs to be a greater analysis of the kind of online content that is available for children. Now, obviously, we've seen this new online safety bill come in the last few days. It's proving to be quite controversial, not least because young people tend to have the wits to get around it more than the adults who have put it in place. But nevertheless, it's true, even if you think back to sort of 10, 15 years ago, you didn't see this kind of violent content almost never in your life you might see a still picture on the front of a newspaper, or some of the worst stuff you'd have BBC News going, for those who are sort of sensitive, look away now, and even then it wouldn't be the worst kind of the violence that you're seeing online every single day. And what's more is that with AI and things taken in small snippets, you don't know the full context, and so someone can get very wound up or distressed or vindictive or contemptuous over something that isn't even true. And so not only are we dealing with those influences, like in Rudakubana's case, genocides and mass shootings, partly inspired by his parents' background in the Rwandan genocide. You've also got all kinds of sort of sadomasochistic violence, sexual violence, taken out of context and sort of idealized as an empowering act, something that can give particularly young men who undeniably have been feeling robbed of place and purpose an outlet. If they can't be useful, they will be remembered some other way. And whilst I actually don't think that's applicable in the case of the Southport killer, it is nevertheless something to be looked at, the vulnerability of young men, and that they are at a juncture in their teenage years where they can either be used for good or used for bad, and there's no support in place or even a willingness to concede or understand this. That means that we can begin to get ahead of these attacks before these people even become extremists.
Indeed. Charlie, thank you. It's always a delicate and tricky subject to talk around,